everyone, it's Jen.
And Ali.
And you're listening to Rising Within Podcast,
a show where we come together to connect the heart, head, and spirit.
Just like rhythm, lyrics, and melody. Been back and forth with this topic, and we wanted to sort of do our due diligence and go through some of the details of what we really wanted to say about this, because we wanted to cover a lot, I guess, would be the best way to put it. And the topic is spiritual bypassing.
Which is such an important and I feel fundamental topic to discuss and hold space for in any conversation or rhetoric about spiritual journeying.
Yeah, I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. Anybody who's on any sort of spiritual journey will come across this on some sort of level, because even upon my own looking into it further and reading about it and bringing my own experiences to it, I feel I'm guilty of some of this too, so it's a good.
Oh, I absolutely am. I have spent years steeped in some of these things enough to know that's not the way.
Yeah. Learn anything new in life. You get really excited about it. And then you get sort of maybe possibly obsessed with it. And then you get fully embraced into the subject matter where you and the subject matter are not separate anymore. And it's almost like eventually after time, you go through it and then you kind of find your peace or your balance within the vibration of anything that you're learning new. So
yes, this is why I'm such a fan of delayed gratification. And I live my life in that way, because I always tell myself and remind myself, coming to the thing, quote unquote, coming to find the thing that gives me that much passion, drive, and enthusiasm. That's the hard part. Once you found the thing, take your time in unfolding and going through all the layers and understanding every niche and nuance of it, because, and this is where we run into another hurdle, because, time's finite and that's what we focus on, right? But you have time with this thing that you've newly discovered. That time before coming to find it was maybe more difficult in navigating than you're now here. You've discovered it.
When we learn something that's new, we want to become an expert on the subject matter. So you're not formulating your own opinion quite yet. You're usually just regurgitating what you've learned through whatever studying that you're doing until you have your own experiences. And then I feel that's when you start to sort of bring in this separation and awareness of what it is. And I think I want to go back to before even Allison and I started to talk about this, because we're both really passionate about this topic. I almost love this quote, which is like, sometimes people are so spiritual, they're no earthly good.
Yes. Oh, that just hit my heart chakra in a profound way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was from one of my favorite books called Let Your Spirit Guides Talk. And that always stuck with me. I think when you read a section and then something speaks to you, it's for you. So I wanted to share that, because when you're on your spiritual evolution and your journey, I am still figuring out my middle ground.
That is inherent in the spiritual journey. It really is finding the middle ground in all of the resources and all of the information and tools that you're drawing from to find that balance in all things, which you just referenced even earlier in this episode.
Yeah. Well, I think we should define what spiritual bypassing is for anyone who's like, I don't know what that is.
Yes. Okay. So spiritual bypassing to me is really looking at one's spiritual journey through a very macro lens, painting it with a very broad brush, and picking up kernels from that journey that are more reflective of inherently positive traits of the spiritual journey. So, the number one thing I have always heard very early on from me, even coming into my journey of spirituality, is that saying of quote unquote love and light, for example. And that being used, and it's not to say that that's a bad saying or that that's not depicted, but not everything is love and light 100% of the time. Not acknowledging everything that exists outside of that space, to me, is in essence spiritual bypassing.
So it's interesting. I could obviously build on top of that, because that to me is not also just spiritual bypassing, but that's also could be referred to as toxic positivity.
Absolutely.
Right. Which is just sort of negating the lower vibrations, if you will, emotions, which for me personally, I don't love that categorization, because through the human spectrum, even though we are, say ascending or connecting to our higher selves or higher beings of light, we're still human. Like our body is human earth vessels in that way of thinking and feeling. It's important that to feel all the things. So to sort of say like lower vibrations are bad and good is like higher consciousness emotions like joy and bliss, and anger and grief and shame and fear are just like not great emotions. Like when in reality, in this lifetime, you will feel all of them because of the human condition. And this just adds to the like division of like better and lesser that I'm not on board with, because there's nothing more frustrating when you're feeling something shows up and someone tries to be like, well, remember the good,
Well, it's an assumption that in that moment you're not remembering the good. And I don't know about you, but when I'm experiencing emotions that are a bit more turbulent in nature, I still always have some kind of intellectual awareness of the good in my life. Totally. I absolutely do. So it's an assumption based on that to start with.
Of course. But it's like also every emotion holds a reason for you to unpack or feel something. So it's like, even if, like I sort of wanted to quote, I did some notes here, guys, this morning. I feel like my guys just sort of like came through me, because they're reminding me of also another book I another book I read. Which is,
you're going to be writing a book. That's what that's about. But anyway, back to
oh my God, what? Okay, we'll cross that bridge a little bit later. A book I read called The Mountain Is You, which didn't land with you, but it landed with me because
I've been getting the message lately to revisit, but that's another conversation for another day.
Okay. So from that book, there's so many great nuggets. And the ones that really resonated with me are that anger, for instance, as an emotion that's sort of quote unquote lower vibration, is miscategorized by the shadow side, aggression, and therefore we try to resist it. It's healthy to be angry, and anger can show us important aspects of who we are and what we care about. Ultimately, anger is trying to mobilize us to initiate action. So anger is not intended to be projected onto somebody else. Rather, it's an influx of motivation that helps us change within our lives. So when we do not see it as such, we tend to bury it, but not ever resolving the real issue at hand. It's kind of like, I feel like I've also been conditioned, I don't know about you, Allison, where like when I'm having these emotions, I kind of tend to hide away and deal with them, right?
I've been absolutely conditioned in my life to not only silence turbulent emotions or emotions that don't fit within, let's say, positive, uplifting, supportive, cheerleading kind of categories. I've also been conditioned to really suppress a lot of those things in a lot of ways. So I will be the first person to always say, the one emotion I don't do well, that is not a good look for me, is anger, because like anger oftentimes for me comes out as confusion. I know it might sound strange, but because I just don't know how to express that I'm upsetty spaghetti about something. But I also see anger as, going back to what you were saying with those wonderful, beautiful nuggets from The Mountain Is You. I also see anger as an opportunity for us to know and understand what is like ruffling our feathers, what is irritating our auric field, what is the metaphorical thorn in my bear's paw in life that I've been ignoring. And I actually find that anger for me oftentimes comes out from a space of not being true to myself, not upholding my own personal boundaries, not paying attention to my own goals and needs and wants in life. And then, and then we talk about how emotions themselves evolve, because anger sometimes doesn't always start as anger. And that's where it gets even more complex. Anger could start as resentment, envy, jealousy.
Well, jealousy is a cover-up emotion. It presents as anger and judgment, but when in reality, it's sadness and self-dissatisfaction. So it's like, anger to me is a transitional emotion, because you're right. There's usually anger, and then, or for me, at least from my experience, like there's something else underneath it. But what I love what you said was that when anger shows up, it sort of indicates an internal understanding of, oh, my boundary was crossed.
And it reminds me of the Netflix docuseries that's on right now. I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's about that nuclear power plant. And I was watching a little bit of the preview of that. I forget what it's called right now, but we'll put it in the notes of the show. The nuclear power plant that blew. And I was looking at, in the United States, and I was looking at the preview of it, and they went from a night shift, a midnight night shift where nothing ever happens, to all of a sudden every single light that could be going off, indicating that their system failure of some kind was going off. They didn't even know where to start in order to start fixing the issue. I see anger as that. Anger is like one of many of our indicator lights internally that something is not sitting well within our spirit. Mm-hmm. And so it's really an opportunity to drill down and see, well, what is disturbing the force?
And I wonder, Allison, because you and I both have Mars in Cancer. So the way anger manifests for me is angry and then I cry.
I feel very connected to my inner child when I'm angry. And this is how I know that there's still work to be done, because I almost get that like tiny bald fist, want to stamp my foot kind of energy. Not like full on tantrum territory, but I feel very much like that little girl that cannot get the toy. Because I'm so self-aware and in my own mind palace all the time, I'm almost immediately talking to myself like, well, why are we angry today?
Totally fair. I think that's so funny. I mean, there's more emotions than just anger, but I feel like that's a big one. What else did it talk about? It talked about debilitating judgment about one's negativity and shadow side.
Yeah, so spiritual bypassing, in essence of what we're talking about in connections to emotions, is essentially the choice to avoid interacting with on any level the things that provide us discomfort.
Bingo.
Which is oftentimes anger, sadness, depression, anxiety, grief, etc., etc.
Yeah. And I think that those all serve a purpose in our trajectory and our journey here on Earth. My emotions, whatever it may be, it's all why I'm here. So to deny them, and I'm guilty of that. I think, of the spiritual bypassing sometimes. And I've reading through this, and I'm like, as an observer, as a friend, listening to somebody, holding space for them, having a sense of the bigger picture, it's irrelevant in this moment because this person is feeling the way that they feel,
Right. And our emotions are a reflection of our own self-expression.
Yeah.
So to deny your own emotions is to, in effect, deny a piece and part of yourself. Is going contrary to the purpose of a spiritual journey, at least from my lens and from my perspective. The purpose of my spiritual journey is to come into myself, come home to myself, come into full understanding, ownership, and power of myself, and to have awareness of that and to expand and learn beyond that through knowing myself. So if I'm denying these emotions, avoiding any spiritual practice connected to diving into these emotions, I'm avoiding part of who I am, who I'm becoming, and who I will be.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that to add to that, I would just say that when we do that, when we deny, I think the most people that are the most authentic are the ones that have acknowledged both sides of themselves and have deep compassion for both, because they're existing, knowing they got their stuff, their shit. With anything, guys, like looking at someone's chart in a bird's eye view, I can see the cycles. This too shall pass, the joy, all the excitement and great stuff. Then I will see the tower moments. It's just cyclical, right?
Well, life is a roller coaster ride. And that to me is the purpose of this realm of existence, is for that roller coaster ride. Like when we were born into this plane of existence, we were punching our ticket to climb onto that roller coaster wherever it may take us. So there are going to be ups, down, loop-de-loos. I'm about to throw up and I don't know where to do that. That just exists in this journey while we're here. But that is very much the purpose of existing here, because within the realm of possibility of all those ups and downs are the opportunities of profound creation, expression, and change.
You know what's interesting about based on what you just said there? First of all, Allison took me on a ride with that. I was listening to another podcast and they asked almost every person they had on that they interviewed to go back to the moment that caused the most disruption in their life. And if they could bypass that essentially and not have that experience, would they? And everyone said no.
I would say no too. We all have our stories. And so for me, I will say, I've been through it. I've been through some shit, but like, would I change any of it? I am so in love with who I am. And I am so in love with this journey of who I'm becoming. Could I part with her? No.
I agree. I echo that sentiment. I feel that I would change anything up to this point. Why would I? It wouldn't be who I am. We don't know the way that ripple effect would happen. You know what I mean?
You just said ripple. So I will say, and others may also not be the same if you bypass some things. We influence others based on just purely how we carry ourselves in this world. I'm not even labeling it as positive or negative, but we inspire thought of some kind of change or question or self-reflection, because we're all just kind of like bumper cars. Like, let's throw bumper car in with roller coaster here. So we're all just bumper cars, like bumping into each other, having these unique, amazing moments of experience together.
I think you said something very important here that I want to acknowledge and emphasize even more. Inspired. If you think about the people that inspire you, it's usually they came from something or they overcame something, they shared something. There's
adversities involved of some kind.
Something about their story that resonates with you in a way that's inspiring. It's never just somebody who just like got there. It was easy. That doesn't invoke inspiration within a collective.
No, turbulence invokes inspiration.
But also we're smarter than that in a way that we understand authenticity. We can feel it off people too. You know, it comes across when people are speaking or when they're sharing. And so there's a level of understanding or being like, this person. And then like, sometimes I need a reminder of that, like inspiration. And there's like I think I talked about this on TikTok, actually, like an emotional button.
I've been finding emotional buttons since you shared that TikTok video. Can I just say?
I was like, that's so brilliant. I love that.
You sent me an emotional button.
I did? Oh yeah, the cancer video, right?
The cancer video. You sent me a video about famous women that are also Cancer sun signs.
Yeah.
And just, you would think that it's just the same as anything else. But for some reason, there was a feeling invoked within me when I saw that, because Meryl Streep was in there. And I mean, some women that just absolutely, I would never have identified myself with characteristics that they possess. But as soon as I saw it, I could not unsee it. And my heart just sang.
I'm so glad. That makes me so happy. Just for anyone who's like, what's an emotional button? In the context of this, it was basically, you can think about something that like inspires you. And then the days he didn't want to go, he would re-listen to that interview and he was like, okay, I want to go again. So it was very much like, we just like have these little things. Like, it could be as simple as a song. Like, I was just in the woods dancing to the song over and over and over again because it gave me such like high love feelings. I was like, I'm in love with life.
This emotional button concept melds and marries very beautifully, harmonizes very beautifully to the spiritual bypassing subject, because those emotional buttons exist across the spectrum of emotions. And so if you don't know your buttons for even anger, we've been talking about joy as a great one, but if you don't know your buttons for anger, for sadness, if you don't know your learned experiences or things that you can witness, smell, taste, touch that evoke these things from you, then how do you navigate in this world? And how do you navigate through your spiritual journey? And emotions to me are just individual instruments within the same orchestra. So what are you going to do if you're listening to a flute solo for 10 minutes of just like, I'm joyful, I mean, that gets to be a little much. I also want to hear the violins of grief. And I also want to hear the drums of excitement and promise. And I want to hear all of it. And for us to exist with only acknowledging certain emotions, we're completely stemming and minimizing the orchestral potential of just expressing ourselves completely authentically, living and being and embodying ourselves within each moment.
I have to say that metaphor of an orchestra is so well said and visually like appealing to me. I love that, Allison. Allison's so good at metaphors and like you definitely speak. It's a visceral. It's not necessarily just like words, if that makes sense.
I think as a funny antidote to that, I think I've just kind of landed on metaphor as a tool to be able to adequately communicate what I'm receiving within spirit that does not come through in words, because I am predominantly clairvoyant and I see more than any other gift. Sometimes spirit is just showing you things visually that's kind of like, okay, there is no Webster's dictionary in this world that can capture what I'm witnessing.
I'm laughing because Allison had said to me once, like, because I was like, what's it like for you with your guides, right? Like, how does it? And she's like, it comes through like charades, but I laugh because like you said it very like eloquently and like, but like I'm just trying to imagine like the frustration of the charades.
Well, it is a back and forth because I'm like, oh, so it's this, and I volunteer a metaphor to them, or I volunteer simile to them, or I volunteer like, you know, a learned life experience that many would identify with.
Totally,
right?
Totally. But I don't know
and then they throw back at me. They absolutely throw back at me. Well, no, it's not quite like that. But if you took this metaphor and it changed it a bit this way, it's probably more like this, but it's definitely not like this metaphor way over here. So it
makes me laugh, like thinking about these higher beings doing like a charades with you. Like, I don't know, that makes me giggle. Like, so.
It is very much an energetic feeling of like, I'm the kindergarten student and they're the teacher.
Well, okay. So another part of this article that really stood out to me too would be finding themselves in bad situations due to excessive tolerance and refusal to distinguish between people. So like over generosity, just like kindness to the nth degree and like compassion to the nth degree. So the idea that every human being deserves compassion and kindness, which I don't disagree with that idea, but realizing that there are like numerous situations in which other considerations should be brought.
There's a difference between idea and in practice, action and behavior. Those are two very different things. You can have that as an ideal. You can have that as a thought, as a feeling, but then to apply that to every single situation and circumstance within your life, I don't know.
Well, see, I read that like spiritual bypassing discernment. Do you know what I mean? Like, and not everyone is out to get you, but at the same time, not everyone needs your time, your heart, and your energy. There are a variety of people in the world going through different stages of life. And for me, I'll use this instance. Like, I, for the longest time, stayed in relationships because I defaulted to loyalty. But once I worked through like my codependency of like the need to be needed, sometimes the good times and the memories outweigh the reality of the dynamic. And so
that's a huge one. Sometimes the memories and the good times and the positive takeaways outweigh our remembered history of the not so great times.
Or even the reality of the dynamic today. You know what I mean? So it's like, you're like, oh, but we had all these, you know, times together, whatever. Like history is not a good enough reason for me to just be in any sort of dynamic. Right? Like there's got to be a lot more to it than just like we had a past. That's sort of what I would say about, at least my personal example of that. I think in the context of the article, they're talking about like humanity as a whole, like all that stuff, but I'm thinking about it with regards to relationships.
It's about it in other episodes where you've even said clearly the words, you know, as a recovering people pleaser. And I mean, I'm in that category too. As a recovering people pleaser, I've absolutely been guilty of being stuck in giving mode with people and not exercising that discernment of who's deserving of having this energy from me and who's deserving of having that energy from me more than myself receiving that energy. And so there's a need to be balanced within self with that level of compassion and sympathy towards others and altruistic intentions between yourself and everyone external to you as well. And the more indiscriminately you give and in that form, the more empty you end up feeling in the end, at least through my learned experience, because you're giving away everything that you have You're giving away all of the love, so to speak, because what are these words that we're using other than they're all within the vein of love, right? Compassion, understanding, sympathy. You're giving away that love indiscriminately, whereas that should always be fed to self first and then given to everybody. And even then, you can have thoughts and ideals that everyone's deserving of having certain things, but like to assume that you're the person to take on that role in everybody's lives is also something that I feel can be unhealthy at times.
It's like spiritually bypassing yourself, in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And you're just sort of like, outputting because you're like, oh, karma will come back to me. I'm supposed to be this person. Like, I'm supposed to love everyone kindly and all that stuff. No, not necessarily. Like, it's some people, I've seen it through astrology, are here to learn about relationships. So they have to go through a lot of like imbalances and, takers find givers, etc. And you kind of figure it out and you understand your worth. And some people, we talked about this previous and like help you get there.
And it just leads to burnout. Honestly, like having experienced it, I can tell you it just leads to emotional, mental, even physical to some degree burnout.
Okay, so another topic that really got me going, missing out on material success because of the belief that money and capitalism. Why can't I say that? Oh my God.
Because you're uncomfortable with the subject.
I know, I'm very uncomfortable with this.
I know.
Capitalism are evil. And I'm like, it is evil. Oh, the system.
We're not taking our bras off and burning them right now, are we? I didn't get that memo.
So I feel very strongly about this. So I will let you start.
Yes. Okay. I have a very complicated relationship with money and wealth and capitalism. Very complicated because I almost put horse blinders on and ignore all of it. So as not to deal with it. It's very much like my relationship with anger. It's very much like my relationship with anger.
We're learning.
Yes. So I've always been, when I was new into my spirituality and on my own personal spiritual journey, and this paralleled with my own personal spiritual journey versus my spirit work journey, which are not one and the same. And I've had to learn that over the years, but are parallel journeys that coexisted for me while going through and traversing all these things. I've had to deal with a lot of conflicting emotions about money. I've had to deal with a lot of conflicting emotions, especially within the realm of spirit work with money. And that's something that we almost always encounter in relation to our worth because of what we just spoke about, the fact that there's sometimes not that discernment between compassion and altruistic intention. So there's this perspective that this stuff should all just be given freely all the time, indiscriminately. And I'm here to say, no, like not for me. It's not for me at all. But then when it comes with money, like I grew up not having a lot of it. I grew up where pennies were very pinched. I grew up where like crusts were cut off of bread sometimes because it was starting to turn. So we're saving the bread. That's still good. Not having had that experience of not growing up with money, but then seeing the difference in comparison with other peers around me where they had the toys, they had the tech, they had like the brand new clothes that fit them perfectly and were off the rack. Whereas, you know, I was always shopping thrift. My new clothes were always new to me clothes growing up. That was the birth of my complicated relationship with money. And then it just became more complex with the spiritual journey. And then adding to it, the number one cause of a lot of romantic relationship issues is money. And I've also experienced that in my life. And so I'm attempting to repair, and I'm really working on my relationship with money as a connection to my self-worth, understanding that I'm deserving and worthy of having wealth.
For me, I think about capitalism just beyond, like not just about money. I think about it as more like the system. I kind of have a little bit of a rebellious streak with it, which kind of shows actually in my chart now that I think about it. They're like, you go left, I'm going to go right. But like, if you think about it, I think my main issue is that it's sort of presented like it's the only way, you know, and at least that's what we've been taught when we were like younger, you know, it's like you think about like your basic trajectory to go to high school, then university, and then you find a job and
conformity.
You work for the man, etc. Like I never fit into the system and just felt like a failure as a result of that. So every time I did a job working for someone else, I really affected my confidence and my emotional state. And so partly because I had to realize my intelligence wasn't necessarily valued in this system. And I also feel very intelligent in an unconventional way. And so I'm still exploring this as I know astrologically, like it lined up the way that it did for the pandemic, which broke down the system, played a big part of like the deconstruction of all of it. And now we're having a process of rebuilding it. Like if you think about like things won't be the way that they were at all, because especially because Pluto was in Capricorn and now it's in the later degrees of Capricorn, which is like deconstructing the system. So people are quitting their jobs. I don't need to work in the office.
I think because we had to, with the pandemic, adjust so many things on so many socioeconomic levels. And we then came to the realization of, oh, wait, there's another way to do things. Bingo. And do I like the way we've always been doing it? And I think a lot of people have come to the space of discovery where it's like, wait a second, I haven't always liked this. Like I've been a part of the system. I've been feeding into it. I'm finding that like, no, it didn't work that whole time. And it's now, you know, coming apart, dismantling. It's now needing to be reassessed and readdressed because it wasn't working. Because we have that saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, this was broke.
With a lot of spirituality, people are like, fuck the system. Money is an energy exchange. It is not bad. It is not evil. It possesses a frequency of like an exchange of services or of whatever it may be. So I had to also, like you, Allison, reintegrate and reintroduce my own belief system with money too, which we covered, I think, in one episode about our backgrounds and where that comes from. But yeah, like it's a process. But for me, I don't think about it just with money. I think about it like the system of the 9 to 5 and the banks.
The grind. I'm so sick of the grind mentality and culture.
Exactly. The hustle culture, just overworking. That's the only way for you guys to make like X, Y, and Z money. Like I under the lens and the scope of work smarter, not harder. I'm here to enjoy
I've been saying that for years.
I'm here to enjoy my life. I'm not going to look back on my fucking life and say, oh yeah, I worked my ass off. Now, granted,
I always say that. I'm not going to be on my deathbed and be thinking like, I wish I had worked more or harder.
But you and I also already intrinsically work way too much as well. Like we have to regulate ourselves and bring ourselves back. So like I say this as somebody who also understands my own workaholicness and when I get hyper focused on something.
Recovering workaholic, yes.
Totally. So I get it because I tried to fit into the system. I did not fit into it. Like applying resume, LinkedIn, this makes me want to puke. I'm sorry. It does. It really does.
So true though. I feel you so hard on this.
Anytime someone's like, let me look over your resume. Sorry guys. I don't mean this in a like patronizing way, but this is my own personal shit. I think I spent my life trying to figure out how to do this and I'm still trying to figure it out. But I've realized over the course of this journey so far, it doesn't have to be like that. And I'm still figuring it out because I know in my hardest hearts that I'm supposed to be here to help share my voice, share my inspiration, and do the things I love. I don't want to like wake up and hate what I'm doing. Life's short, man. Like it's just, there's so many different avenues. And I actually feel like the school system completely failed me. It fails people like me who don't fit into
I agree with you and I see it.
That box. And so I was, programmed and told that I wasn't that smart. And as a result of that, like I believed that for so long that I had to do all this work to shake it off and realize, no, I am. And I'm supposed to be more of a trailblazer or more of whatever, rather than following the normal capitalism system. But in the context of spirituality here, this is the one where I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of a little bit in the spiritual realm with this, but I also understand I can't just like pray my way to like money. I have to contribute or co-create and all that.
You have to walk the talk.
Totally. anything about human design is like my whole existence here is to always chase the thing that lights me up. If it doesn't, it doesn't work anymore. It's like, wow, she's done a lot of different things in her life, and it can be seen as like, oh, she's not committed. And I'm like, no, I chase what sparks me. And also that's how I'm designed. And then it's like trying to explain to a person in a suit and tie what human design is. They're going to look at me like I
get the opposite reaction with my resume. And I even had an interaction like this at work recently, where I am someone that really totally, absolutely conformed to the system. I am someone who absolutely, excelled in scholastic situations and achieved a lot of accolades and experiences and rewards. Like, I am someone that earned those scholarships and Dean's List and all those things. But I am someone that really leaned heavily into all of that because I come from a very kind of destabilized, chaotic environment. And so the system for me was a space to actually receive validation and confirmation of my worth outside of myself. And so that can be the other side of it. But I'm someone where if I show up with my resume, you will take one look at my resume, look at my face, look at my resume, look at my face, and be like, she did all of this and she is this qualified. Quite frankly, I'm overqualified for a lot of my life experiences. I'm far overqualified. Like, I just wanted to bring this full circle by giving the opposite kind of perspective, because we've had very different life experiences, but we've arrived at the same kind of space energetically.
Totally.
Yes.
And let me say this very clearly. Like, when I'm talking about this, it's more from my own lens. And I realize that not everyone's on a spiritual journey, and some people are like, there's nothing wrong with that. Listen, my family is very much doing their thing and like the system and all this stuff. And it's great. And because of that, like, I've had a really fantastic upbringing. So I think for me, it comes from lens of like, I had to figure it out,
Right. So spiritual bypassing in this context is having a polarized view about it at all. If you have a very polarized on one end of the spectrum or other about capitalism, about money, you are bypassing something.
I think that's a good roundup. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They serve purposes for different reasons. And I think it's like what speaks to you, what works for you. Like, we're all designed differently. Some of us are meant to thrive, like, in that environment, like you are. So I'm not, because that's my chart and it wanted me to figure out a different way. Now I can, I don't know, validate myself, I guess, or figure it out in my own way. So
that's what it is. Validate yourself. Validate yourself. That's what I found about conforming to the system, was that, wait a second, this external validation's getting me so far, but I'm now getting stuck in workaholic, the grind, the hustle, and this is not breeding joy within me.
Yes.
And so why?
So that's really what the issue is.
To get my affirmation and validation external to these things, while still on an intellectual level, removed from, to some extent, emotion, intellectually understanding, let's say, the purpose of these systems,
right?
What they've served up until, let's say, 2020. I was going to say 2022, but oops, I'm channeling something else at this point. What they've served, seriously, I was just on the wavelength of spirit being like, oops, we let the cat out of the bag. Something big's happening this year. But in any case, up until 2020, and we're now having to like review and dismantle and really like put through a nice microscopic lens all these things that have not been serving us and providing for us. But we only get there through journeying through. We don't get there by ignoring all of it.
There you go. There's the full circle moment, folks. It's not one over the other. And again, Allison and I are really just coming from a place of sharing our own experiences through the lens of spirituality and figuring out our own spiritual bypassing as well. And like wanting to share it. Like I'm definitely not coming at this as an expert and someone who just wants to start the conversation. There's minorities and there's all of these different things that happen in this plane of existence that as a human, amigo, not good.
As a result of labels like race, culture, gender expression.
And I get we're all one. And I understand that from a bird's eye view, but on this plane existence, I'm not going to look someone dead in the eye as a Caucasian woman and say, we are all one. You know what I mean? Because you grew up a different way that I had to grow up based off of maybe color or based on whatever. So me to say that to you, to me, would be spiritually bypassing your experience here on this plane of existence. That's how I feel about it.
That was so well said. Girl, I love you.
I love you, girl.